I want you to picture a word. It is a word that, for a lot of you listening right now, especially if you identify as an introvert, it probably triggers a mild, involuntary shudder.
Oh, absolutely. A cold sweat even.
Right, exactly. Like you're standing at the edge of a hotel ballroom, you're holding this lukewarm beverage, adjusting your name tag, and you realize you have to engage in, well, networking.
It really is the universally dreaded professional obligation. I mean, just the mere thought of it drains your social battery before you even step foot in the room.
It really does. For so many of us, it just feels like this sleazy transactional chore. But our mission for today's deep dive is to completely dismantle that reputation. We are pulling apart a really fascinating guide from Stella Pop titled, For the Introverts, 5 Ways to Enhance Your Networking Skills.
Yeah, and the goal here is to really strip away all that ick factor, right? To reveal how introverts can not just survive these encounters, but actually master them to navigate career roadblocks, find mentorship, and genuinely grow.
Right, and doing it in a way that doesn't require fundamentally changing your personality or, pretending to be the loudest voice in the room. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because Stella Pop sets the table with a very specific, progressive approach.
They really do. We're going to explore how they redefine the entire concept of networking from the ground up. Then we'll look at the psychology of building those connections, the daily mechanics of maintaining them, and finally, the specific environments where introverts have strategic advantage.
But, I have to push back on the premise right out of the gate. Can an introvert really learn to enjoy this? Because when I think of traditional networking, it feels like forced corporate speed dating.
That's a very common feeling, yeah.
Right. It's just walking up to strangers, aggressively exchanging business cards, and trying to survive the small talk without completely dissociating.
Well, that corporate speed dating analogy is exactly the misconception we need to correct right away. If your goal is rapid, superficial volume, like just collecting as many business cards as possible in 60 minutes, then yes, an introvert is going to be miserable.
Absolutely miserable.
But this material points out that real networking isn't about small talk or volume at all. The actual goal is creating and nurturing a few mutually beneficial relationships. You are building a professional support system, essentially.
An ecosystem of contacts, basically.
Exactly. People who provide support, advice, and resources over the course of an entire career, not just a single evening.
Which feels a lot more human. It changes the objective from how many people can I impress tonight to who can I actually build a meaningful connection with.
Yes, and that shift is crucial.
But before we get into the how of building that ecosystem, we have to look at the underlying psychology. We have to move away from that superficial stereotypes and look at what is actually happening in your brain. Stella Pop frames networking as an exercise in something called self-efficacy.
Right. Self-efficacy. It is a foundational psychological concept. It essentially means having an ingrained confidence in your own ability to navigate complex situations, build relationships, and create your own opportunities.
Okay, so it's an internal belief system.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is the comparison to flexing a muscle. The argument is that self-efficacy in social situations isn't some innate talent you're simply born with or without. It is a trainable skill.
Like going to the gym.
Yes. The more you use it and practice, the stronger and more stable that internal belief becomes.
I understand the muscle analogy, but if networking is a physical muscle, doesn't that make introverts the people who have essentially skipped leg day for the last 5 years?
That's a funny way to put it, but I see your point.
Because the prospect of just casually flexing in a room full of strangers feels incredibly daunting. And honestly, I want to challenge this term self-efficacy. It sounds incredibly academic. Is that just a polite, sanitized corporate buzzword for faking confidence?
That is a highly perceptive question. It does sound like corporate jargon at first glance, but there's a distinct difference between faking confidence and building self-efficacy. Faking confidence is an external performance.
Like putting on a mask.
Right. You are trying to trick other people into thinking you're comfortable. Self-efficacy, on the other hand, is an internal shift. It's about changing your own narrative.
So you actually believe it?
Yes. When you genuinely believe in your capacity to handle a conversation, even an awkward one, you are fundamentally more likely to leverage opportunities because you trust yourself to handle the outcome.
So it's the difference between feeling like a victim of a crowded room versus feeling like an active, capable participant in it.
Precisely. The introvert's dread often comes from a feeling of powerlessness in highly stimulating environments. Self-efficacy restores that power.
which lowers the friction of taking the action in the first place. You stop waiting for a mentor or a job referral to magically drop into your lap because you realize you have the agency to shape your own environment.
Yes, it's the belief that your deliberate actions will actually yield results.
That reframing is really powerful. So if we are going to start building this networking muscle, we need to make sure we have proper form.
Proper form is the perfect way to look at it.
Right, because you don't just walk into a gym and start flailing around with heavy weights, you'll pull something. And according to this guide, proper form for an introvert relies on two massive foundational pillars: being fiercely authentic and shifting your focus entirely to adding value.
Because without those two pillars, you're just reverting back to the corporate speed dating we were trying to avoid.
Let's examine that first pillar, authenticity. The advice here is explicitly against trying to impress people, which is wild because isn't that the entire cultural narrative around networking?
Usually is, yeah. Put on the suit, polish the elevator pitch, project absolute flawlessness.
Exactly. But the strategy here is the exact opposite. Focus on being genuine. Embrace your weird niche hobbies. Be completely transparent about your strengths and, crucially, your weaknesses. They want you to lean into vulnerability.
Because authenticity is the only thing that builds deep trust. If you are projecting a flawless, heavily curated version of your professional self, the other person is going to instinctively keep their guard up.
Because we can tell when someone's being fake.
We are hardwired to detect when someone is performing for us. But when you admit a struggle or geek out over a highly specific hobby, you give the other person permission to drop their guard too. That is where an actual relationship starts.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. They pair that vulnerability with the second pillar, adding value.
Yes, point number 3 in the guide.
Right. The script is completely flipped from what you can extract from a contact to what you can inject into their life. We're talking about sharing highly relevant articles, offering introductions from your own circle, or literally volunteering your time and skills to help them with a problem.
It is a very generous approach.
But combining these two, showing vulnerability while aggressively giving away your value, it feels risky. Isn't the business world supposed to be fiercely competitive? It feels a bit like planting a garden where you have to aggressively water the soil long before you ever ask for a harvest.
That's a great analogy.
Like operating a freemium model for professional trust. You are giving away your premium expertise and resources up front for free long before you ever ask them to subscribe to your needs.
The freemium model for professional trust. That is an incredibly accurate way to synthesize this. And yes, it feels counterintuitive if you view your industry as a zero-sum game.
Which a lot of people do.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes perfect strategic sense, especially for an introvert. Think about how introverts naturally operate. They often excel at deep observation, synthesis of information, and careful listening.
And take everything in.
Exactly. By deploying those natural traits to give away targeted expertise, maybe sending an industry report that perfectly answers a question someone raised last week, you do something vital.
You prove you were actually paying attention.
Exactly. It builds massive trust. It transforms you from a needy transactional contact, someone who just wants a job or a favor, into an indispensable resource. People desperately want to help those who have already proven themselves to be helpful and reliable.
It completely disarms the dynamic. If I approach you and say, hey, I saw this incredibly dense white paper that specifically addresses that supply chain problem your team is facing, thought it might save you some time, you aren't defensive.
No, I'd be relieved. I'd be incredibly grateful.
Right. And importantly, doing that requires no small talk. It requires no aggressive posturing. It relies entirely on the introvert's natural strength. Thoughtful, one-on-one observation, and targeted follow-through.
Which is a beautiful strategy in theory.
In theory, yes. But having this giving, authentic mindset doesn't mean much if you never leave your living room and actually initiate the contact. The thought of orchestrating these interactions is what still paralyzes a lot of people.
Yes. So we need to shift from the underlying psychology of networking to the daily physical execution of it. How do we put this into motion?
The mechanics of the muscle.
Right. Points 2 and 4 in the guide. Make an effort and lean into connections.
And the guide pushes introverts to be proactive here. You cannot wait for these deep connections to spontaneously manifest. You must selectively stretch your comfort zone and actively orchestrate the interactions.
Whether that's suggesting a low-stakes coffee catch-up, a quick lunch date, or even just a virtual meeting.
But there's a specific mechanical tactic buried in this advice that really caught my eye. To manage all these interactions, they recommend keeping a note. Literally maintaining a written record of the specific details about people's lives, their career struggles, and their personal interests.
It is highly tactical, and it's the engine that makes the whole adding value strategy actually work.
I have to admit, though, when I first read that, my immediate reaction was to cringe. Isn't keeping a digital dossier on your acquaintances a little bit clinical?
I can see how it might feel that way.
It feels like running a CRM, customer relationship management software, but for human friendships. If I find out my friend has a spreadsheet detailing my dog's name and my recent promotion, I'm going to feel like a sales lead, not a connection. Doesn't that contradict the whole be fiercely authentic rule we just established?
I can completely understand why that feels clinical or even slightly manipulative at first glance, like you're mechanizing human empathy. But let's look at the alternative.
Okay.
What happens if you don't take notes? You meet someone, you have a genuinely great, authentic conversation about a complex problem they are facing at work, or maybe their kid's soccer tournament. And then, because life is chaotic, 6 months pass.
And you forget everything.
Exactly. You see them again, and your brain has dumped all of that information. You're back to square one, asking generic questions.
So what you're saying is that note-taking isn't about building a cold sales database. It's about outsourcing your memory so you can actually be present in the relationship over the long haul.
Precisely. Taking notes ensures you can honor the vulnerability they shared with you previously. It is a tool for active listening.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you track these details, you lower the cognitive load on yourself. Introverts often get overwhelmed in social settings because they're trying to process so much information at once. By writing it down later, you free up your mental bandwidth.
It's systematized empathy. You are building an infrastructure to ensure you don't accidentally become a bad friend just because you have a bad memory.
Systematized empathy, yes.
If they mention a software bug in May and you stumble across an article about a patch for it in September, your notes allow you to execute that freemium trust model perfectly.
And that is essential because networking is a very long game. The Stella Pop Guide leans heavily into persistence, which is point number 5.
Right. Don't get discouraged.
They explicitly tell introverts not to get discouraged by silence or rejections. The reality of professional life is that people get busy, emails get buried, and follow-ups go unanswered. You have to stay engaged continually, pushing through the awkwardness.
They actually use the phrase, fake it till you make it in the context of persistence, which makes sense now. It is not about faking your personality. It's about faking the momentum when your internal monologue is telling you to just give up and retreat to the couch.
Exactly. You push through the initial resistance until following up just becomes a habit. You lean on the mechanics, the notes, the calendar reminders to carry you through the moments when your self-efficacy wavers.
Okay, so listener, let's take stock. You have the mindset of self-efficacy, you have the foundation of authentic vulnerability and adding value, and you have the mechanics of systematized empathy through diligent note-taking and persistence. The natural question that follows is, where?
Where exactly does an introvert go to deploy this newly built machinery?
Right, because you need the right environment to test it out. And the guide actually lays out a fascinating spectrum of venues, 5 specific places.
Yes, and it is not just a random list. It really reads like a sliding scale of difficulty.
It really does. On one end, you have industry events and conferences, those high-pressure, highly stimulating trade shows, then professional associations with their workshops. And then it slides down to online networking platforms, specifically LinkedIn discussion groups.
And then alumni networks.
Yes, using shared college connections. And finally, community events and casual local meetups. So what does this all mean? When an introvert looks at this vast spectrum of physical and digital locations, how should they strategically approach them?
Well, this raises an important question. How do you choose the right venue? The key is recognizing that you don't have to start on hard mode.
I was going to say, looking at the spectrum, alumni networks feels like an absolute cheat code for an introvert.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you are instantly bypassing the dreaded stranger danger instinct. You already has a built-in commonality. It's like skipping the first 20 minutes of awkward conversational probing because you can just immediately say, hey, did you also suffer through Professor Smith's brutal macroeconomics final?
It is a total cheat code, and that's exactly why they suggest leveraging those shared university connections to network up. You borrow the trust of the institution to accelerate the personal connection.
That's brilliant.
But it also ties back to how we build that self-efficacy muscle we discussed earlier. You do it through progressive overload.
Just like weightlifting. You don't start with the heaviest weight on the rack.
Exactly. The spectrum of venues allows introverts to strategically scale the difficulty of their interactions. If the thought of walking into a massive trade show ballroom paralyzes you, you don't start there. That will just reinforce your negative internal narrative.
So start small.
Instead, you start by actively engaging in a specialized LinkedIn discussion group. Online platforms remove the sensory overload entirely.
Right, you can draft your thoughts, edit them, and provide incredibly high-value insights without anyone literally looking over your shoulder.
You build the muscle with a lighter weight in a controlled environment. Once you feel your self-efficacy solidifying there, once you see people responding positively to the value you add, you graduate.
You move up the scale.
Maybe next you try that alumni coffee meetup, where the built-in trust lowers the barrier. Then a casual community event. And eventually you carry that internalized confidence into the big industry conference.
That is an incredibly practical roadmap. It really neutralizes the fear of the process when you realize you can systematically control the difficulty level. You are the one orchestrating the environment.
It puts the power back in your hand.
It really does. So
Right.
to bring this all together and synthesize this deep dive for you listening, networking absolutely does not have to be a sleazy, energy-draining chore. We can officially throw out the corporate speed dating metaphor.
Good riddance to it.
Honestly, it is simply a trainable muscle of self-efficacy. And you build that muscle through fiercely authentic vulnerability, through the freemium model of generously sharing your specific knowledge, through systematized empathy.
Seriously, start keeping those notes.
Yes, keep the notes. And you do it all through progressive overload across a spectrum of digital and physical venues.
It fundamentally transforms networking from a self-serving, transactional activity into a community-building one. It aligns perfectly with how introverts naturally prefer to interact with the world. Deeply, thoughtfully, and purposefully.
Exactly. So whether you are prepping for a massive convention next week, or you're just looking around realizing your career has stalled and you need some fresh momentum, you have full permission to stop trying to impress people.
Stop trying to craft the perfect elevator pitch.
Just start observing, taking notes, and being a valuable, authentic resource to the handful of people right in front of you.
That shift in perspective changes everything about how you walk into a room.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We spent this whole time talking about how introverts can successfully survive and navigate the world of networking. But let's look at the actual blueprint we just mapped out. If the true core of networking is rooted in active listening, thoughtful one-on-one follow-ups, careful observation, and a preference for deep, meaningful relationship nurturing over superficial banter, well, it begs a pretty massive question.
Which is?
Are introverts actually hardwired to be the absolute best networkers in the room once they get past that initial approach anxiety?
That is a fascinating way to look at it.
Think about that next time you're standing on the edge of the ballroom holding that lukewarm beverage. You might just have the strategic advantage.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. You've got the tools. Now go flex the muscle. Take care.